Grace to all of you and peace. Thank you for having me today on a rather cold winter day. My name is Ken Smith. I'm the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church on East Washington Avenue in Madison. Pastor Ben and I met each other this past summer when a group from Holy Cross came to Madison and Triangle Ministry as part of a local mission event. It was a wonderful experience all around, and this is the first of an exchange for us with you. The first Sunday in June, Pastor Ben will be preaching at St. John's, and we'll be glad to hear what he has to say. The topic is healing in the Gospel of Mark. Beginning in the 1990s, some began to interpret the New Testament in a new way, looking at the first Christian communities using sociology, comparative religion, statistics, growth and population studies, and archaeology, as well as the amazing increase in available manuscripts which described life in the first century Roman Empire. This social reconstruction of the first Christian communities revealed how the very obscure, marginal Jesus movement became the dominant religious force in the Western world in just 200 years. The immense growth of early Christianity was due not to a series of sudden mass conversions, but an achievement of a 3.5% per year growth rate in Christian congregations that made it the significant religion of the empire less than 300 years after the birth of Jesus. Cultural trends contributed to this growth in the first century. There was a steep decline in the pagan sacrificial system, the sacrifice of animals to appease various gods. Belief in the old Greek and Roman gods was fading, and the old patterns of religious identity throughout the cities of the empire were declining. People were looking for something new, and there was a hunger for new beliefs, spirituality, values, and a new way of looking at life. And Christianity's success was grounded in these cultural trends. But there was more, much more. At the heart of such growth was the social mission of these early urban congregations. The cities of the Roman Empire were crowded, the most densely populated areas humans have ever experienced. The cities were often as densely populated as New York City, but the tallest buildings were only 2 or 3 stories high. There was simply no space. Everyday life was intense and brutal. Crime was rampant. Fire was a constant threat and a deep fear. There was no sanitation. Disease could easily overwhelm the city. Plagues were common and could suddenly reduce the population by 30 to 50%, destroying relationship and kinship patterns. There was no health care. There were neither social services nor assistance to those in need. Famines were frequent. People died from want and hunger. Unwanted infants, especially girls, were abandoned in the streets. The prevailing cultural values encouraged people to scorn and reject those who were ill, disabled, or in need. The average lifespan in a Roman city of the first century was less than 30. And in the first century empire, the birth rate was declining. The death rate was climbing. Into this urban hell, the first congregations were born. These small groups of people with their new religion and new values began to live differently. Christians actually shared their resources in times of want and famine, with an emphasis on widows, orphans, and those most vulnerable. It turns out that caring for the economic needs of each other meant that fewer Christians actually died when there was a famine. Christian congregations began the adoption of the unwanted female infants, and the rapid adoption of unwanted children, especially females, in a society that accepted infanticide meant that congregations grew with more children around. Women were soon playing central leadership roles in congregational life as they grew up, and pagan Roman men were joining congregations through marriage. And Christian groups made caring for the sick a priority. Some became hospitals or clinics, especially in times of plague. Generally, out of fear, the ill were abandoned, but Christian communities became places of care. Survival rates for illness increase when the sick are cared for, even if the care is primitive. And so Christians survived illnesses at much higher rates. These missions of first Christian congregations gave them a positive growth rate in a culture that was experiencing a population decline. Christian congregational mission in the first century explains why the church accomplished its 3 to 6% growth per year, resulting in half the empire being Christian by the end of the 3rd century, moving their numbers from as few as 1,000 when Paul started his urban missionary work to as many as 300,000 by the close of that century. Now, let's look at the Gospel of Mark and our reading for this first Sunday in Lent. The ancient congregation responsible for Mark was an urban congregation in a large city in the Roman Empire, perhaps Rome itself. Life is intense and fast. Things happen immediately. The congregation began probably in a Jewish synagogue, but moved beyond that space fairly quickly as it embraced more and more Gentiles. Women are prominent in this congregation. The book of Mark remembers Jesus primarily as a healer. In the 13 chapters to his last week of life, there are 17 healing encounters. Every time you turn around, Jesus is healing. Look at how much healing takes place in the verses we had this morning. By contrast, Luke, written later, still has 16 or 17 healing encounters, but instead of 13, it takes 21 chapters to cover the same ground. Jesus becomes much more of a storyteller and a teacher. And that's even more the case in Matthew, who also has about 16 or 17 healing encounters, but now there are almost twice as many chapters as Mark. And Jesus has long sermons and complex arguments with his opponents. And in John, there are only 4 healing encounters, and Jesus just talks on and on. But in Mark, in this version of the life of Jesus, he is primarily one who heals. He does it over and over again in Mark, and healing is what they remember about Jesus. It is important to these people. The congregation must have been focused on caring for the sick. Healing may have been their mission, their purpose. The building housing the congregation probably did not look like this at all. It probably looked more like a field hospital rather than a church, with sick people everywhere being cared for in every available corner. Caring for the sick or healing is the priority for the congregation of Mark, just as shelter work and emergency relief is our priority at St. John's in Madison. We know that when people are sick, if they are cared for, they are more likely to recover. Care, no matter what that care is, assists in the healing process. Care increases the chance that the person will get better quicker. And there are no miracles to this except the miracle of tender compassion and the way the body works. But the miracle of healing was what this congregation accomplished for many people, and they did it by simply caring for those who were ill rather than abandoning them. And they were inspired for this mission by their memory of Jesus, recalling Jesus as healer whose death even brought the healing that comes at the close of life. The reading this morning begins Jesus' ministry with 4 healing events. And in these healings and throughout the book, we encounter the issues facing those first caregivers and details about how they accomplished the task. One of the very first issues is authority. Notice that the reading today quickly focuses on the question of authority. Authority in the community of Mark has become something different than in the Jewish synagogue where the congregation started. If you're a first century center for healing and care, you will have many issues and things to decide. How do we care for the sick? Where shall we place them? How shall we feed them? What shall we do? These are the questions asked over and over as the mission is constructed. So in the Church of Mark, questions of moral and practical authority become important. And here in Mark, in this reading, authority or moral authority is grounded in healing. The basic principle by which we guide our lives is healing, that which brings wholeness and health and reconciliation of body and soul. That is the authority of the church in Mark, and healing is still a wonderful, authoritative principle for living. Do you wonder what you should do? Well, what would be the most healing thing? Do that. And this authority is put to the test whenever there was an urban plague. People often notice the intensity in the book of Mark. Things happen immediately, quickly. The pace of life is fast. The issue's intense in a mission hospital when many people are dying. People wonder why Mark is so secretive about the good news. Don't tell anyone. But the small church was probably overwhelmed by the needs of the sick and did not want to broadly advertise what they did. There were just too many people to care for already. This may be the case if there was a plague in a city with no health care. People sometimes notice the dark, end of the world, apocalyptic themes in Mark. But if half the people around you are dying as an illness spreads through your city, you too may have a sense that life as we know it is about over. People notice the details of the many healings which reveal how healing was accomplished in Mark. Cloth and warmth brings an important healing function. Think of Lutheran World Relief quilts. Human touch was significant. Oil and soothing ointment eased pain. Naming the demons or diagnosis mattered. There is often something to eat, and nourishment and nutrition makes a difference. People get up and move as we still want them to do in physical therapy. People notice the emphasis on alone time in Mark. And this may reflect the needs of caregivers in intense urbanization to just get away. Caregiving can be pretty overwhelming. And people notice that the resurrection and the afterlife are not particularly strong themes in Mark. Other later memories of Jesus fully develop these things, but Mark's Jesus is just too busy healing in this world to focus on the next. And yet, it is clear in these pages that there is a growing sense of hope, even when the community fails. Even if we try to heal and the patient dies, even if we are filled with fear. And this emerging hope, not yet fully developed, but still there, still real, energizes this people for its mission for caring for the sick. And so they write these words this morning, inspired by the one who healed so many so quickly in such a short time. Amen.